Unless you've been living under an absolute rock, you have certainly heard about Cathie Wood and her ARK funds, particularly the signature fund ARKK Innovation ETF, which had a skyrocketing year in 2020 and, well, it has been an abysmal 2021. I wanted to take a further look into the portfolio and the composition of ARKK and see just how closely we could replicate that with simple ETFs, specifically sector ETFs, and just see how much alpha she's really bringing to the table and give my 2 cents in opinion on whether I think this alpha is actually going to continue or what else I would rather invest in. So first, let's pull up ARKK on Morningstar, which I've already done, and look at the total returns of it. This thing has performed awesomely over its short lifespan. So it's really only existed since 2014 or so, which in the investing world is not a very long time period. And we'll pull it up here. And on Morningstar, we will see the cumulative growth of $10,000 in ARKK. So if you'd invested $10,000 way back when it launched in what would have been November 1, 2015, to now, your $10,000 would have compounded up to $51,000. Or I should have said, yeah, compounded, grew. This is a cumulative total return chart, so that means that all the dividends and distributions are going to get reinvested. Granted, on this portfolio here, of what's in it, there's not a really high dividend yield here in ARKK. It's focused on growth stocks, not so much dividend and income stocks. But let's put a benchmark here and look at it next to the S&P 500, which has done pretty well over the same time period, but ARKK, 4xing your money, has absolutely blown the S&P 500 out of the water. We can see ARKK exploded here in 2020. That brought Cathie Wood to notoriety. And, well, the kind of downfall of it so far in 2021 has maintained her notoriety. Now, let's look at the actual composition of this portfolio. So we'll come in here, we'll go to portfolio. Interestingly, right here, it's pretty highly exposed to mid-cap stocks and definitely heavily tilted to growth stocks. And then when we look at exposure to sectors, we got almost 11% consumer cyclical, about 20% in communication services, 1.5% in industrials, 36% roughly in technology, and then in healthcare, 31.33%. Now, what's very interesting about this, or worth pointing out, is that it's very concentrated, right? So when you buy index funds, you're getting hundreds or thousands of active holdings, not active, but actual holdings. Here, you are very highly concentrated into 44 holdings, the biggest one being Tesla, 8.45. I mean, this thing is heavily weighted in the top 10%. Does it give that number? Some of them will, some of these kind of reports like Yahoo will tell you how much percentage is in the top 10, but we can see just looking at this, it almost looks like close to, well, I can just do the math here. What is that, 14, we'll call it 20, round numbers, 26, 30, 35, 39, 43. So close to 50% here is in the top 10 holdings. The big chunk being in Tesla. So it's a very concentrated portfolio, largely driven by information technology and communication services. Now, we can represent this with sector ETFs here. So State Street has kind of a full onslaught of sector ETFs, which we can use. The only problem is with this, XLC, the Communication Services ETF, has only been around since 2019, so that wouldn't let us go all the way back in testing this against ARKK to 2014. So to fix that, I'm just going to replicate the Communication Services, or not replicate it, but I'm going to replace this XLC with VOX from Vanguard. Certainly a suitable alternative. So we'll come in here to Portfolio Visualizer. We will put VOX in right there. What do we got? We got consumer discretionary. We'll use that for cyclicals. XLY, and then what is the other one? Technology, XLK, XLY, XLK. So we got communication, cyclicals of consumer, and technology. I think that means that we need healthcare and industrials in here. So healthcare is XLV, and then industrial XLI. XLI, let's put that on there. And then we will put ARKK in here. That's going to be portfolio 1 at 100%. Now, something else I want to point out here, and this is I'm going to use this to adjust the actual holdings that we're testing, is the portfolio is not static at these, right? In other words, ARK is not saying, hey, we need to hold 36% technology. We need to cap our maximum communication services exposure at 20. These are basically varying all around. So for that reason, I'm going to kind of simplify things here and just equal weight communication services, technology, and healthcare, and omit consumer cyclical, and then industrials. So let's just come back here. We're just going to omit, industrials, and then consumer discretionary. And we're just going to put all these in here at 33. I'm going to put this one at 34 because we got to equal 100, and then 33%. All right. Now, another thing that we should do is establish a relative benchmark, because in this example, or not in the example, but in the Morningstar analysis, I had the S&P 500 on there. But the S&P 500 is not as heavily weighted in tech, information services, and healthcare as ARKK is. So for that, I think a suitable benchmark would be QQQ. So why am I going back to this when I should be going to QQQ? Which is the NASDAQ 100 ETF by Invesco. So we'll click on that. You can also triple leverage this with TQQQ if you want to get wild. We're going to pull this up here. Let's pull up the interactive chart. Not the interactive chart. Let's go to the holdings. That's what I'm really concerned about here. I want to get something close to what Cathie Wood holds in ARKK. So portfolio is where we shall go. And then we'll look at the sector exposure. So we get consumer cyclical, 16.8, much higher than ARK holds. Communication services, 17.46. And then technology, really heavily weighted at 49. Very minimal in healthcare. So we're kind of on the downside of that. But yeah, a lot of high exposure to technology. Relatively narrow holdings at 102. It's going to be much more narrow than what we're going to establish here in a portfolio of sector ETFs. So let's run this back test here and see what we got. We're just going to put QQQ in as portfolio 3 at 100, and we will also leave the S&P 500 on there as the benchmark. And here we go. So going back to January 2015, what is the withhold? ARK. We can see the numbers. So over this time period, ARK has had an astounding return here at 28.67%. And again, we knew this was coming. We knew that it had a rocket ship year in 2020. Our equal weight portfolio of tech, communication, and healthcare has only had a 15.38% annual return, which is basically about the S&P 500's annual return, a little bit more. And then QQQ as a benchmark, 22.35. So if we look at these by Sharpe ratio here, interestingly enough, QQQ has had the highest Sharpe ratio, and this is a measure of risk-adjusted return, right? Where are we getting the most return for the risk that we're taking on over this time period? And the ARK fund has had a not really even a higher risk-adjusted return as measured by the Sharpe ratio than the S&P 500. That's interesting. Let's just kind of look at this and go back pre-rocket ship ARK of 2020. Pre-rocket ship ARK. What do we need to do? Oh, it's going through year-end 2020. You're going to click Analyze. And right here, we can see ARK actually underperformed for the first few years of its existence, underperformed the S&P 500, underperformed everything else, and then rocket ship started kind of taking off a little bit towards the middle of 2017, and since then it has delivered some outperformance. Now we know 2020 is going to be the rocket ship ARK year. There it is. Look at that. 152% CAGR for ARK in 2020. Sharpe ratio 2.44%. Okay, wow. If we look at 2020, we should just go all in on ARK. But then if we look at 2021, 2021. 2021. If we look at 2021, oh wow, we can see ARK down 15.10%, a negative Sharpe ratio. QQQ at 1.95, and S&P 500 again, or not again, but consistently holding its own weight here. And this year, it looks to be, well, it's the highest winner by Sharpe ratio, but total return is going to QQQQ. So let's set this back here to 2014 and just talk about a few things here, right? So what is my 2 cents? What do I think is the wisest investment here? Well, one thing we have to consider is that fund managers, active fund managers, don't have a very successful track record of consistently outperforming benchmarks, right? The numbers, depending on the time sample and the index and the benchmark, it varies, but overwhelmingly fund managers underperform their benchmark. And I think that in one survey I saw, or not one survey, but one study, over a 15-year period, I think it was 85% of active fund managers investing in U.S. equities did not outperform the S&P 500 on a total return over that period of time. So, going with an active fund manager, you are already in a losing position statistically than you are with an active fund manager. So you'd have to have some very serious conviction that Cathie Wood, as the fund manager of ARKK, is going to outperform the market. Now, maybe she will, maybe she will not, but statistically the odds are against her. And for that reason, I would not bank on ARK consistently outperforming. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but I could show some examples of funds that looked really good for a certain period of time, and then, going forward, they didn't. Actually, you know what? I'll show you one because I know of one really quickly off the top of my head, and that is SEQUX. I think that is the Sequoia Fund right here. Sequoia Fund has a long track record. Of investing in large cap equities with a very narrow portfolio. We need to go to the max, right? So that fund goes back to 1970. Okay, well, what if we put on here, out of comparison, let's put the S&P 500 on here. That would be the benchmark for Sequoia Fund. All right, and we can see it's clearly had some stellar moments. We'll just go back to 2010. All right, so from 1970 to 2010, the Sequoia Fund just abso-fucking-lutely blew the S&P 500 out of the water, right? So you might be looking at this saying, well, this is 2010. You're looking at this saying, I want to invest all in on the Sequoia Fund. This thing's a winner. It's going to continually absolutely piss on the S&P 500. But now if we look at the most recent time period after that, right? So this would that would be like a back test. Now we're looking at out of sample data, which is important to do whenever you're back testing anything. And now you can see over this time period, the Sequoia Fund has not outperformed the S&P 500. The S&P 500 has outperformed Sequoia Fund, particularly it had a really bad year here in 2015 when I think it was Valiant, a company called Valiant went under, and that was like one of only 20 actual holdings that Sequoia held. So keep that in mind. Just because something was outperforming for a short period of time doesn't mean that it will. Let's just pull it back. Yeah, and as we pull it back, the S&P 500 still maintains its edge, but it doesn't look like what Sequoia did from 1970 to 2010 over that 30-year period where it absolutely pissed on it, right? And those same principles apply to what we're looking at here with the ARK Fund, ARKK. There's no rule, and it is statistically unlikely that ARK will continue its outperformance going forward. So my 2 cents is I'd rather have an index fund, a market cap weighted index fund like QQQ, or equal weight the sector ETFs. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below on this. ARKK versus a simple index fund with with similar composition to ARKK. What would you guys rather invest in? Let me know in the comments below.